$1,000 of a non-public school placement. But you have to consider the Desert Mountain also has a number of very small districts, and also they do not have a large number of non-public schools up there. So 30,000 probably wouldn't offer much protection in our area. You'd have to be looking at a different dollar amount. So I don't know if there are any you want to discuss or have questions on the non-public school, non-public agency cost pool, or should I go ahead into the legal cost pool?
Let's move forward then to the legal cost.
Okay, so our XPOT does operate as a legal cost pool, and we looked at the differences in other SELPAs that have legal cost pools. And again, this was a common type of risk pool for SELPAs. One of the criteria some SELPAs use in determining whether or not you would be entitled to reimbursement out of the legal cost pool or support from that was whether or not the issue had SELPA-wide implications. So you're looking at the issue for your particular due process case, and is that something that is important to all members of this SELPA? A good illustration of that was Orange County at one time put together an amount of money to look at fighting due process cases having to do with autism. At that time, they had spent a great deal of money and training to develop their own school-based autism programs, and so this affected all of them, and they wanted to go ahead and be able to defend districts' autism placements in programs, and so set aside money just for that. Many of them discussed just the slightly lower standard, that the case had been reviewed. Many times they set aside a committee. Sometimes it was just the self-administrator reviewed the case and determined that the case had merit and could move forward with the support of the cost pool. Most all of them had something in there that indicated that SELPA policies and procedures had been followed, and we have that in our current local plan for the XPOT use. And kind of again, a unique outlier was the legal cost pool was used when the legal costs would exceed the district's mandatory reserve. And so again, we have some SELPAs that have a large number of very small rural districts that perhaps have much lower reserves, although I know none of us have very healthy reserves at this point in time. But they, this is how they use their legal cost pool. In looking at how they went about reimbursing from the legal cost pool, there were cases, especially where they had a review process, where they would determine whether or not the case would be fully funded out of the XPOT or only partially funded. And it was not clear really how those decisions get made. Again, it was very common to see that these reimbursements were made at the end of the year and were prorated back depending on if the cost pool was sufficient to cover the entire cost. And then in one case they set a percentage similar to our 70-30 split that they would pay up to 75% of the legal costs. Kind of some more unique cases. Like in our SELPA, we have 3 attorney firms. They have very similar rates, but they do vary. And so they set a standard for the attorney rate at the lowest rate of any of the approved firms. And then if you chose to have an attorney work on the case that charged at a higher rate, then you would just get the lower rate reimbursed. Some of them set an amount for reimbursement of the parent attorneys, and many of them, look at reimbursing the settlement costs as well as the attorney fee costs. So one of them mentioned expert witness costs. We haven't had a lot of hearings in our SELPA, so we haven't had this really come up. I know in the past hearing, one of our districts made available one of their staff members who served as an expert witness and did a very nice job. And in some cases, the legal cost pool only covers costs that are associated with hearing, so they're not covering the costs associated with mediation or resolution. And, I don't know that that would really drive how you operate at that point in time. I think that there would be a lot of other factors that districts look at before they would go to hearing. Some other types of pools that were mentioned, some SELPA set aside money for new initiatives. So if they wanted to start a different type of program they didn't have available, such as a non-public school alternative, there would be seed money for a district to do that. Some of them use this for literacy initiatives. Some SELPAs had pools for facilities. We have this concept in our local plan. We've never had to use it because we already have a facilities model that works. However, perhaps as facilities age and such, this could be something that may come up. Some SELPAs did not receive enough money in their regional service allocation to pay for the SELPA operation, and so they said they had a pool that would support the operation of their SELPA. Others had pools for small district impact, so we address this in our funding model already. Some addressed using pools to fund independent evaluations. And in one case, they talked about using the legal pool as a source for a no-interest loan when the district, it had been determined through the recommendation process that the district was not eligible for funding because of either the case didn't have SELPA-wide merit or it didn't wasn't recommended for funding. When we look at our XPOT, these are the recommendations FICMAT had made in their original report. And so some of these you see are reflected in how other SELPAs operate. One was to look at 100% reimbursement for the district attorney case only in those cases that have SELPA-wide implication. They talked about having limits based on the number of times the district uses the legal pool. We probably would need to adjust for size because if you have more parents, you have more exposure oftentimes. And then also they recommended that we limit the number of independent evaluations that are supported each year out of the XPOT, and we already have addressed that, and that the only independent evaluations that are supported from our XPOT are those that result from a due process settlements or a hearing decision. They recommended phasing out the non-public school agency reimbursement, and we actually discussed that quite a bit last year. And they talked about having claims approved at the end of this year. While that was a very common theme in a lot of the SELPAs, clearly at this point in time with the cash flow problems in districts, it's probably not something we would want to move for, because with the deferrals, you're already having problems with having that cash on them. So it's like getting reimbursed after time. So any questions on that? That's pretty much the summary. If we'd like to move forward on any of these, we can with further research.
Self
require kind of a committee to be formed to really look at that. I know that when I was program manager, we had well, I think it was right as I became sub-director actually, but we had a case in Upland that went forward. And the issue was whether or not the district had to employ a non-public agency to serve as the aide in the classroom, or whether or not a district-trained aide was appropriate. And I would say that would be something that would have SELPA-wide implications, because any of you could have that same request. And if we can demonstrate we have the training resources here to train one-to-one aides to meet the students' needs, then it's less likely you would continue to get that issue brought up. You know, we have other issues, you know, if it's something like, you know, a parent wants an independent or challenging your evaluation, well, that probably wouldn't have SELPA-wide implications. Off the top of my head, I can't think of some of the more recent cases you've had or something, but, you know, many times they're very individualized to the student. You know, other times, you know, it's really a challenge, you know, to the type of instructional program or the model of instruction you use. Questions?
There a recommendation from SELPA for these particular directions?
You know, I think we did bring forward a recommendation to look at our non-public school, non-public agency reimbursements last year.
Okay.
You know, there was support from program and finance, but I think I also recognize that perhaps with the uncertainty of the fiscal times we were in, this is maybe not the right moment to make changes that, you know, it's hard to kind of make a change when you already have a lot of uncertainty. So I think that is something to continue to consider. I personally, do feel like, we could limit it to new non-public school placements, for certain dollar amounts. You also may want to look at the data, because my sense is that for most districts, you probably have a pretty steady rate of non-public school placements. I don't see any big changes from year to year. But we would really want to look at specific data and see if you really have a steady rate of non-public school placements, then that's really not a risk. It's almost, an expense you can budget for. It's an expected expense. And then you could reserve a smaller pot of money to just pay for those truly unexpected or very high-cost placements that would not be part of that typical budgeting process.
I think the company was thinking about just being cautious right now because of the budget uncertainties. The question I would have is how much rules reserve being covered in the back programs that we're offering this year? And it should be something that we think about more long-term time to the budget for once we're clear on the state budget.
The machine is really noisy, so. Was that more a comment or a question?
Oh, it was a comment, just maybe if things are pretty stable across all the districts and there are no wild swings in the